Hi friends, I thought I would do some watercolouring with you today. And this is a relatively cheap block of 100 sheets of watercolour paper, which it's quite good, sorry about the noise, quite good quality for something so cheap. And what I've been doing to learn more about my paints and to practice washes is dividing this into 4 so it's not so daunting, and then just using a couple of colours, different brushes, different techniques, and making little abstract landscapes, I guess I'd call them. Not trying to paint anything, I'm really just trying to learn about my colours. This is the same 3 colours, but applied in different quantities and with different mixes. So just trying to get a feel for how to colour mix. Can't remember what colours those are. Usually I write it on the back here with a little, look at that, from 2021, with a little note to myself of what the paint was. So Winsor & Newton Caput, I call it, which granulates, and Daniel Smith Undersea Green, which splits. I don't think you get blues from it. I think that's another colour. Anyway, I thought I'd show you how simple this is. If you, like me, you have some paints and you want to use them more, but you haven't been letting yourself get into it. I've started doing this little practice in the evenings. It's just really nice. It's very fast. Well, actually an hour can pass by before you know it. Anyway, first thing to do is to just tear this down. I'm not precious with this. I keep these as examples. I suppose if they worked really nicely, I might put them on a card, or even in a frame if I was really happy with them. But generally I keep them in a box, which I can look at and refer back to see what certain colours do, or what colour combinations I like or don't like. I think for me, oops, sorry, there we go, noisy bit over. I think for me, just more inviting about a small piece of paper. I know I'm only going to use a little bit of paint, so I'm not going to waste it, not going to waste the good stuff. And pardon me, I can just puddle around, which is really what I like to do. So here's my palette. Now, just recently, usually I use a round brush, and for years I've stuck to a round brush. Actually, this one, I love this brush. It's my favourite. But in class we were doing these really large works with a little bit of watercolour and on not very absorbent paper, so I used this brush, and this has suddenly become a real favourite. Okay, so to make life easier, if you're working from a palette, you can just give them a squirt to activate the paint that's there. And one of the things I also like to do is play with this palette mud so I can start afresh. So this is from some mixes I was doing on there the other night. I just have a sponge here to take the excess water off. And if I try and get all this paint on here, lift it up. God, I need more water. love the fact that no matter what the size of the brush is, you can always get all sorts of marks with it. I have sketchbooks where I've played with different brushes, like kind of using a different brush on each page, just to see just how many different kind of lines and things I can get with it and how much control I can get with it. And you can see how, like, I have no preconceived idea of what I'm doing here. And it's, you know, it's not going to be a work of art. What it is going to be is a little self-directed lesson. So this is just palette mud, right? So now I've cleaned that palette up pretty nicely. I can start to make more mud, wipe that all off. And now I'll go in and actually be a bit more selective. Trying to, that's a bit wet. Trying to pay attention to contrast, which is always something I have always neglected in the past. For some reason, I'm very good at midtones. Even when I'm drawing, I find it really difficult to remember to have contrast. And without contrast, you sort of, you know, it's just all a pleasant blur. Too much water. So this is possibly still a bit of a pleasant blur. You can see this lunar black is beautifully granulating, falling into the tooth of the paper. And that's possibly about as much water as this paper will hold. You can see it's buckling pretty intently. The other thing I really like to play with, there's two things I really like to play with. One is a bit of splatter. See what that little extra bit of colour does. See those little ones up there were dry enough to take that. Ooh. It's kind of, I guess that's more of a glaze, isn't it, than a splatter? Get that extra water off there. I'm going to try putting in a little bit more dark. So all of this play, whether you're concentrating on it or not, it's actually teaching you about water control, degrees of wetness, how much you can work into something without it getting really unhappy, how good your paper is at various procedures, what different brushes do, what different colours do, what you like, what you don't like. Oops. I don't know yet what I really want to paint. I know I do want to paint. Not quite sure what. So doing these little studies satisfies my urge for playing with paint. familiarises me with my colours a little and gives me ideas. So it's amazing how far you can push a piece of paper. So I think before that paper completely falls to pieces, I will leave that one there. Let that dry. And have another go on this. Q and I were talking about, is there a right and a wrong side? I'm not sure if this will show up on camera, but you can see this texture that's here as opposed to this kind of more whoops, ignore that. Not so much texture here, like it's this looks almost kind of crisscrossed, like it was, the paper was laid on that side. I don't know what I'm talking about. But anyway, I call this the front on this paper. Ooh, it's a pretty, relatively smooth cold press. Okay, now, just for something different, let's go into it with this brush. So another really super fun thing to do is to actually start with some water droplets and then drop in, let's go with some bright colours this time, drop in some paint. And where you hit the water drops, it's happening here, not so much anywhere else. Okay, so that's phthalo blue. Now I'm going to add in some ochre. This is ochre rose. It's a hot pink, but when it's mixed with other things, you get some wonderful blends. And so this really, look at this. I mean, I just find it amazing that these two colours can give you this beautiful soft colour here, or this stronger colour here. If it's by itself, look how bright that is. It's crazy. And if this is by itself, equally. Now, one of the things I really like to do with these little samples is use them as pockets and for die cuts to use in my journals. And they look so good, even if you think you've just made a huge mess. The fact is, you've actually coloured the paper, and now instead of just a blank piece of paper, you've got something much more interesting. Oops. That's pretty intense, isn't it? What happens if we add a yellow? Whoops, daisy. Possibly a little bit too much water, but that's all right. It'll dry. So I won't push that all the way up, because it'll probably make mud with that purple mess. But look at that. Isn't that cool? Actually, I quite like the way that's going here, so maybe I will let that run a little bit. Can encourage some runs here. you've got a forest. Now we can lift with a dry brush. Lift some shapes out of there. Watercolour really is magic. Even if you're using the cheap paper and you don't know what you're doing. You can make things happen that you didn't know you could do. That's pretty cool. You can imagine die cutting a beetle or something out of that. It would look really good. Okay, we've got 2 more pieces of paper. This time, I might put on some colour. So this is a granulating colour called Caput Mortuum Violet. And here is some sap green. And just tickle the edge to blend out those bottom colours. And then what happens if I try and spray that top edge a bit? Actually, it would have been nice with some green up here, and then they could have looked more like trees. It's not too late. Trees or little coral formations on rocks, this sort of thing always makes me think of. The joy of watching paint dry. Okay, so there is a little underwater scene. And now, how about we try some sort of sky? So actually here, this is one of the things I really like to do, is to just play with a yellow, red and blue mix and see what happens. So this is an azo yellow mixed with a quinacridone lilac to get soft pinks. And then we'll add some pushy cobalt blue. That looks like a little car. Oops. When in doubt, change your brush. So that's a little fan brush, which is another way of softening edges and actually of touching in some paint. So if you just keep using the same colours, I've no idea what I'm doing, you can probably tell that. I'm going to put the red and blue together here. This cobalt blue is very pushy. It's like little eyelashes. And then come back into this with the yellow and see what that does. Like you've got like instant grassy look with that. And again, you can lift. I haven't done this before, lifting with a fan brush. So long as your brush is a bit drier than your paper, it'll suck up some of that paint. Ooh. Oh, I like the way that drags across there. And pulls the colour with it. Look at that, before you know it, you've got a tree. Just put a little bit of shadow under there. Huh. Okay, and then to finish, just do a little bit of splatter of something on the top there. So that's how quick it is to actually have used up a whole sheet of paper and done 4 little studies that are going to be useful in your journal if you don't want to keep them as studies. So what I would do, if I probably would want to keep this one as is, and I'll write either down here or on the back the colours that I used, and maybe that this was a fan brush that I used here. So I'd probably keep that one. This one I would probably try die cutting some bugs. So here's some bugs that I die cut from painted papers. These were acrylic painted papers, these particular ones, but they're super cool. So much more fun. Oh look, there's a watercolour one. So then you've got instant coloured bugs instead of just card coloured bugs. And then also this size I actually just use as a page in a journal. So obviously not with that written on the back, but if you have this inside a journal or outside a journal, or even as a flip on this page, they just add so much interest. So don't be frightened to play with your paints. You bought them, you might as well use them. Enjoy. I hope you pull your paints out and have some fun with whatever paper you have, whatever paints you have. Just set aside, even if it's only half an hour. This, I can see now, only took about 20 minutes, so it's all usable, even if you only want to keep one, as it is. But I mean, even this is looking pretty interesting with all of these blooms from the extra water and the granulation from the kaput colour. Same here. I'm really happy with how I've actually managed to get some contrast happening here. And what I'd probably do when this is dried is maybe get some watercolour pencils and go back in and play with forming these into something more like trees, just to get the practice at making tree forms, because It always surprises me how hard it is to make trees look like trees. This one, yeah, this one I will probably just do some die cuts. I mean, even just cutting out a little journal card or a tag. Here we go, look. These are just some watercolored, very simple washes that I did. This was actually on a bit of manila folder. So even if you don't have watercolor paper, look at that. I think that's those really cheap Kmart, the watercolors that come in the little stacking circles for kids. And it worked so nicely on the manila folder, and of course that cuts out to be a really good tag. And then if you have watercolor paper, of course, you can get stronger cards and use every little bit and end up with more ephemera, but more personally painted ephemera, which is great. Here's some other ones actually. We've got some watercolor ones here. Yeah, look. These cute little mason jar die cuts. There's a wash I did with Glad Wrap. There's a very pale wash. I'll probably put a bug inside that one. Here's a little wash I did with some, I don't know what the colours are. But you can see we've been having a bit of fun, and how much more interesting these die cuts are than these die cuts, which are taken from printed cardstock. These, by the time you ink the edge of that and put a little beetle or something inside, these are just so quirky and unique and much more interesting. Let me know what brilliant ideas you come up with after you've done some washes and thought of something else to do with yours. Enjoy. See you next time.